I still remember that morning. The way the light came through the window, soft and pale, like it was unsure whether to enter the room or not. It was quiet, too quiet for a Thursday. I had woken up before the alarm, something I rarely did back then. I just lay there, listening to the sound of the ceiling fan turning slowly above me. I didn't know that it was going to be the day everything changed. I didn't know that by evening, the house would feel like an empty shell, my life divided into before and after. Her side of the bed was cold. I thought she had gone to make coffee, the way she usually did when she couldn't sleep. I remember calling her name softly, Emily, but there was no answer. I sat up, rubbed my eyes, and that's when I saw it. The suitcase. It was by the door, half open. The sight of it didn't hit me right away. At first, I thought maybe she was going to her mother's place for the weekend. She had done that before when things between us felt heavy. But there was something different this time, something in the stillness of the room that felt final. Her phone was on the dresser. That's what confused me. Emily never went anywhere without her phone. Then I saw the folded piece of paper next to it. My name written in her handwriting. Small, neat, the same way she used to label jars in the kitchen. I didn't open it right away. For a minute, I just stood there, trying to understand what was happening. I told myself it was nothing serious. Maybe she just needed space. Maybe she'd gone for a walk. Maybe I was overthinking again. But then I looked around the room. Really looked. Her clothes were gone from the wardrobe. The photo that used to sit on her nightstand, the one of us at the lake, smiling, holding hands, wasn't there anymore. The air felt wrong, like the house itself knew she was gone. When I finally unfolded the note, my hands were shaking. It wasn't long. Just a few lines. I'm sorry. I can't do this anymore. Please don't call me. You'll understand one day. That was it. No signature. No explanation. I stood there for what felt like hours, just staring at those words. I didn't cry. Not at first. I think my mind was trying to protect me, refusing to let it sink in all at once. I went through the motions, brushed my teeth, made coffee, sat at the kitchen table staring at the cup until it went cold. The chair across from me was empty. I kept glancing at it, as if she might walk back in at any moment and laugh about it, tell me it was all a mistake. But she didn't. When the clock hit 9, I called her phone anyway, straight to voicemail. I called again and again until the sound of the automated message, "The number you have dialed is not available," started to feel like a wall between us. That's when I noticed something else. Her wedding ring was in the small glass dish by the sink. She had left it there, like it didn't mean anything anymore. I remember picking it up and holding it in my hand, staring at the thin circle of gold that once symbolized forever. It was strange. I didn't feel angry. I just felt hollow. I walked around the house in silence. Every corner carried her presence. The faint smell of her perfume in the hallway. The half-finished painting she had been working on in the living room. The book she was reading, left open on the couch. Each thing I touched felt like a goodbye she hadn't said out loud. I sat down on the couch and tried to replay the last few weeks in my mind, looking for signs. Maybe I had missed something. Maybe she had been trying to tell me, and I just didn't listen. She'd been quieter lately. I remembered that. Distant. I'd come home from work and find her sitting on the balcony, staring out at the street, lost in thought. When I asked what was wrong, she'd just smile and say, "Nothing. I'm fine." I wanted to believe her. I guess it was easier to pretend things were okay than to face what was breaking between us. We'd been married 8 years. Not perfect years, but real ones. The kind where love changes, from passion to partnership, from fireworks to quiet companionship. But somewhere along the way, something faded. Maybe it was me. Maybe I stopped noticing the little things, the way she looked when she laughed, the way she wanted to talk about her day, the way she waited for me to ask how she was feeling. Work had taken over my life. I told myself I was doing it for us, for the house, for the future, but what's the point of building a life if you're never really there to live it? That day, I went to work anyway. Not because I wanted to, but because I didn't know what else to do. Sitting still felt unbearable. My best friend, Mark, noticed something was off the moment I walked into the office. He'd known me since college. We'd been through everything together. He was the kind of guy who always had a joke ready, who could make anyone smile. He asked, "Rough morning?" I just nodded. He laughed. "What? Emily mad again? You probably forgot something, man." I didn't say anything. He frowned, then asked, "Everything okay?" I told him she left. Just like that. The words came out flat, emotionless. He stared at me for a long moment, then patted my shoulder. "Give her some time," he said. "She'll come around. She always does." I wanted to believe that. But as the day went on, I knew this time was different. The note was too final, too cold. That night, I came home to silence. The house felt larger somehow, the kind of empty that echoes when you breathe. I sat on the edge of the bed, holding her ring, and for the first time, I cried. Not loud, not dramatic, just quiet tears that wouldn't stop. It wasn't just the pain of losing her. It was the realization that I had taken her for granted, that somewhere along the way, I stopped showing her that she mattered. The days that followed blurred together. I'd wake up, go to work, come home, and sit in the dark. Friends tried to reach out, but I didn't know how to talk about it. How do you explain that the person you loved most decided you weren't enough? I kept reading her note over and over, trying to find hidden meaning between the words. I searched for clues, reasons, anything. But all it said was what I already knew. She was gone. Weeks turned into months. I started doing things alone. Cooking for one, watching TV alone, talking to no one. People said time heals everything, but that's not true. Time doesn't heal. It just teaches you how to live with the ache. Sometimes, late at night, I'd hear footsteps in my dreams, soft, familiar, and I'd wake up thinking she was home. But it was always just the wind, or my own heart trying to remember the sound of her. Mark would drop by sometimes, bringing food or a beer, trying to get me to talk. He'd say things like, "You gotta move on, man. She made her choice." I'd nod, but I couldn't. Moving on felt like admitting she was never coming back. And deep down, I wasn't ready to accept that. It was about 6 months later when I found out where she'd gone. Mark came over one evening. He looked nervous. I remember the way he wouldn't meet my eyes at first. He sat down, exhaled, and said quietly, "There's something I need to tell you." And in that moment, before he even said it, I already knew. Mark didn't say anything for a long time. He just sat there, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor like the words were too heavy to lift. The sound of the clock filled the room, slow, steady, cruel. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. Finally, he looked up. His eyes were red. I don't know if it was guilt or pity, maybe both. He said, quietly, "She's with me." Those 3 words split the air like glass breaking. He didn't try to explain right away. He just said them, and then looked at me, waiting for whatever would come next. But I didn't shout. I didn't hit him. I didn't even move. I just stared at him. My mouth opened, but no sound came out. I remember thinking, this can't be real. Mark? My best friend? The man who stood beside me at my wedding, who toasted our love, who spent weekends fixing things around the house with me. He must have seen it in my face, the disbelief, the pain, because he said, "It wasn't supposed to happen. We didn't plan it." I laughed quietly, not because it was funny, but because it was absurd. "You didn't plan it," I said, "but it happened anyway." He nodded, ashamed. It started when she left. She called me. She needed someone to talk to. I didn't mean to. I cut him off. "Stop." There was a silence then. Heavy. Suffocating. I looked at him, this man I'd trusted with everything, and I realized something. Betrayal doesn't always come with noise. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it walks in through the front door, sits on your couch, and looks you in the eye while everything inside you falls apart. I didn't ask for details. I didn't want them. Knowing was already too much. Mark stood up and said, "I'm sorry, man. I didn't want to hurt you." I said nothing. He waited, maybe hoping for forgiveness, or a fight, or something that would make it easier. But I just stayed there, frozen, staring at the wall behind him. When he left, I sat in that same spot for hours. The sun went down, the room went dark, but I didn't turn on the lights. It wasn't until later, when the house was completely still, that I felt it, the weight of what had happened. Not just losing her, but losing him too. The 2 people who knew me best were now strangers bound by a secret I never wanted to exist. The days after that blurred together. People talk about heartbreak like it's one sharp pain, a single, clean wound. But it's not. It's slow. It lingers. It creeps into everything you do. I went to work because I didn't know what else to do. I answered questions, nodded through meetings, smiled when people spoke. But it was like I was watching myself from outside. Every sound, every word, every reminder of normal life felt distant. When I came home, the silence hit me the hardest. You start to notice it in small ways. The way a spoon sounds when it touches an empty cup. The way footsteps echo when no one else is there. That's what the silence did. It reminded me she was gone. At night, I'd lie awake replaying moments over and over. Our first date. The day we bought this house. The fights we had over nothing. The laughter after we made up. And then I'd see her face, not as she was, but as she must be now, with him. That thought haunted me. It wasn't just jealousy. It was loss. The kind of loss that eats away at your sense of who you are. One night, I went through our old photos, digital ones, on my laptop. Every picture told a story I no longer believed. The smiles felt forced, the memories tainted. I ended up deleting most of them. It felt like erasing pieces of my life, but I couldn't bear to see her eyes anymore. I thought about calling her, or him, but what would I say? There are no words for betrayal. No sentence that can undo what's already been done. So I said nothing. And in that silence, I began to change. I stopped checking my phone every few minutes. I stopped replaying what-ifs. I stopped waiting for her to come back. But the emptiness didn't go away. It just settled deeper, like dust that never clears. A few weeks later, I ran into someone at the grocery store, one of Emily's friends, Sarah. She looked uncomfortable, like she didn't know what to say. After a few polite words, she said softly, "I heard about you and Emily. I'm sorry. She's figuring things out." Figuring things out. That phrase stuck with me. Maybe that's what we're all doing, trying to figure things out. Some people run from their pain. Others sit in it until it stops hurting. For me, it wasn't about figuring it out. It was about surviving it. I threw myself into work. Started going for long walks after dinner. I'd walk past the park where we used to sit on weekends, past the coffee shop where she loved to read, past the street where we'd laugh over small things. Everything reminded me of her, but I kept walking anyway. Sometimes, when the air was cold and the sky was gray, I'd find a strange peace in it. Maybe because the world finally looked the way I felt inside. Quiet, faded, and unsure. Mark tried to reach out once. He sent a message that said, "I know you hate me, but I still care, man. Please, don't shut me out." I didn't reply. It wasn't hate I felt, not really. It was something deeper, quieter, like a wound that refused to close. He and Emily moved away a few months later. Someone told me they were living in another city, starting fresh. The thought made me sick, but it also made me realize something important. Their story was no longer mine to follow. I had to let them go. That's when the silence changed. It wasn't just emptiness anymore. It became space. Space to think. Space to grieve. Space to understand myself again. I started noticing small things. The sound of birds in the morning, the way sunlight hit the old wooden floor, the smell of rain on the porch. Life goes on, even when you're not ready for it to. But healing doesn't happen in a straight line. One evening, about a year later, I came home from work and found a letter in the mailbox. No return address. Just my name written in handwriting I knew too well. For a long time, I didn't open it. I just sat there, holding it in my hands, feeling that same familiar tremor in my chest, the one I'd felt the morning she left. When I finally did, I saw her words again. Fewer this time, but heavier. "I hope you're okay. I'm sorry for everything. I never meant to hurt you. Maybe one day, you'll understand why I had to go." There was no explanation, no closure. Just more silence, wrapped in paper. I folded it carefully and put it away. Not because I forgave her, but because part of me still needed to hold on to something real, even if it was broken. That night, I sat on the balcony, watching the lights of passing cars. The air was cool, the sky clear. For the first time in a long time, I felt something close to calm. Not happiness, not peace, just calm. Sometimes, that's enough. There's a strange thing that happens when you've been alone long enough. At first, the silence hurts. It presses against you, fills the space around you, makes you want to scream just to hear something. But over time, that silence becomes familiar. It stops being the enemy. It becomes part of the air you breathe. That's what happened to me. Months turned into a year, then another. I built a routine that made sense only because it kept me moving. I'd wake up early, before the sun, make coffee, and sit by the window. I'd watch the world wake up, the newspaper boy, the joggers, the cars heading out. It was like watching life from the outside. At work, people stopped asking how I was doing. I think they figured I was fine, or maybe they didn't want to open a wound that never seemed to close. I smiled more. I joked when I could. But when I came home, the quiet waited for me, patient, unchanging. Sometimes I'd turn on the TV just for the noise. Other times, I'd let the silence stay. I remember one evening, sitting in that same living room where Emily once painted by the window. The canvas was still there, half finished. She had started it months before she left. I used to hate looking at it. But that night, something made me stand up and walk over to it. The painting was of a shoreline, waves meeting sand under a gray sky. Simple, soft strokes. Unfinished, but beautiful. I sat down, picked up one of her old brushes, and stared at it for a long time. I didn't paint. I just looked. That's when I realized how much of her was still in this house. Not in the things she left behind, but in the spaces she once filled. The quiet corners, the sunlight that used to fall on her hair, the smell of paint that never really left the room. I thought about throwing the painting away, but I couldn't. So I left it there. A piece of her that didn't demand forgiveness, only remembrance. Around that time, I started writing in a notebook, small, ordinary thoughts. Nothing profound, just words. I didn't know what I was trying to say. I just knew that when I wrote, the silence felt lighter. I wrote about mornings that felt too long. About how coffee never tasted the same. About dreams where she still smiled at me. Sometimes I wrote letters to her, letters I never sent. One of them began with, "I don't know if I miss you, or the person I was when I was with you." That line stayed with me, because it was true. I missed who I used to be, hopeful, sure of love, unafraid to give everything without wondering if it would last. Love changes you. Loss changes you more. It was about 3 years after she left when I saw her again. I wasn't expecting it. I had gone to visit my mother in another town. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon, and I stopped by a small cafe on the way back. The place was nearly empty. I ordered a coffee, sat by the window, and started reading. When the bell above the door rang, I didn't look up right away. But then I heard a voice, soft, familiar, and something in me froze. I turned my head, and there she was. Emily. She looked almost the same, yet completely different. Her hair was shorter. Her eyes were tired, older somehow. She was holding a child, maybe 2, 3 years old. She didn't see me at first. She was talking to the barista, smiling faintly. Then, as she turned, our eyes met. Everything inside me stopped. For a second, neither of us moved. It was as if time had folded back on itself. Two people who used to share everything, now strangers connected only by memory. She blinked, and I saw it. That flicker of surprise, of guilt, maybe even sadness. I didn't know what to do. I wanted to look away, to leave, but my legs wouldn't move. She whispered something to the child, then slowly walked over to my table. "Hi," she said. Her voice was quiet, almost trembling. I nodded. "Hi." We stood there in silence for a moment that felt like forever. Then she asked, "How have you been?" It was the kind of question you ask someone you haven't seen in years. Safe, polite, but hollow. "I've been all right," I said. "You?" She smiled faintly. "Good. Just busy, you know life." Her eyes darted to the seat across from me. "Mind if I sit?" I nodded, even though part of me didn't want her to. She sat down carefully, placing the child on her lap. The little boy looked at me curiously, his fingers clutching her sleeve. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The thought hit me like a wave. He might be Mark's son. She must have seen it in my face, because she looked down quickly. "This is Daniel," she said softly. "He's 3. I smiled weakly. "He's beautiful." "Thank you." The silence returned. Heavy, awkward, full of things neither of us knew how to say. I asked about her life, where she was living, how things were going. She answered politely, carefully, like someone walking across thin ice. When I asked about Mark, her face changed. A small shadow passed through her eyes. "He's not around anymore," she said quietly. I didn't know what that meant, and I didn't ask. Maybe he left her. Maybe something worse. It wasn't my place anymore. But a part of me, the one that still remembered what it felt like to be betrayed, felt an odd mix of anger and pity. We talked a little more. About nothing important. About weather, work, the city. But underneath the small talk, there was something else. An unspoken grief that hung between us. When she stood up to leave, she looked at me and said, "You seem different." I nodded. I had to be. She hesitated, then whispered, "I'm sorry." I wanted to say I forgave her, but the words didn't come. Instead, I said, "Take care of yourself, Emily." She smiled sadly, nodded, and walked away, her child's small hand gripping hers tightly. I watched them go until the door closed behind them. And just like that, she was gone again. I sat there for a long time, staring at my reflection in the cafe window. I thought about all the things I could have said, how much she had hurt me, how long it took to heal, how the silence had become both my punishment and my peace. But maybe it was better this way. Maybe some stories don't need words anymore. That night, when I got home, I poured myself a drink and sat by the balcony again. The same old spot. The same quiet night. I thought about her face, older, softer, and how strange it felt to realize I no longer loved her the way I once did. That kind of love, the one that once consumed you, fades. Not because you want it to, but because your heart can't live in the past forever. It was then that I realized something I hadn't before. I wasn't angry anymore. The pain, the betrayal, the loneliness, they had shaped me, yes, but they no longer controlled me. What remained was something quieter. Acceptance. Maybe that's what forgiveness really is, not erasing what happened, but learning to carry it without breaking. After that day at the cafe, something inside me shifted. For years, I had imagined what I'd say if I ever saw her again. The speeches, the accusations, the questions that burned inside me every night. But when it actually happened, none of that mattered. She wasn't the same woman I had lost, and I wasn't the same man who had been left behind. It was strange. You'd think that seeing her again would reopen all the old wounds. But it didn't. If anything, it made me realize how much I'd already healed. Pain has a way of fading slowly, so slowly that you don't notice it's gone until you meet the person who caused it and feel nothing. That night, after coming home from the cafe, I slept through the night for the first time in years. No dreams, no restlessness, just sleep. When I woke up, the world looked a little clearer. The sky was bright. The air felt different. I made coffee, sat by the window, and looked out at the street below. Kids were heading to school. Someone was walking their dog. The world was quietly carrying on, just as it always had. And I realized something simple but profound. Life doesn't wait for you to be ready. It just keeps moving. The next few months were slow but peaceful. I started spending more time outside, walking trails, taking weekend drives to nowhere in particular, stopping at small diners, and talking to strangers who didn't know my story. There's something freeing about being unknown. No one asks what went wrong. No one looks at you with pity. You're just another face, another story among millions. Sometimes, at night, I'd still think about Emily. Not with pain, but with a kind of distant gratitude. She had broken me, yes, but she had also forced me to rebuild, to face the parts of myself I'd ignored for too long. I began to write again, not just in notebooks, but properly, short stories, essays, things that came from the quiet corners of my life. I wrote about love, loss, and the spaces in between. It wasn't for anyone else. It was for me. Words became my way of breathing again. One afternoon, I was at a small local library, a place I used to go to when I needed to clear my mind. I sat by the window, typing on my old laptop, when a voice broke my concentration. "Excuse me, is this seat taken?" I looked up. A woman stood there, holding a stack of books against her chest. She looked about my age, calm eyes, a soft smile, the kind of presence that doesn't demand attention but quietly draws it. "No, please," I said, closing my laptop slightly. She sat down and smiled. "Thank you." It's always crowded near the front. We didn't talk much that first time, just small exchanges about the weather, about books, about how peaceful the place felt. But something about her voice stayed with me after I left. Her name was Claire. Over the next few weeks, we ran into each other again, at the library, at the little cafe nearby, once at the park where I often walked. Each time, we talked a little more. She was a teacher, loved poetry, quiet mornings, and long walks by the river. There was something about her that reminded me of stillness, not emptiness, but calm. She never asked too many questions. She never pushed. It was easy being around her. No expectations, no history. Just two people sharing the same quiet spaces. One day, as we were walking back from the cafe, she said, "You always look like you're listening to something no one else can hear." I laughed softly. "Maybe I am." She smiled. "Then whatever it is, I hope it's kind." That line stayed with me. Because for the first time in a long while, I realized I wanted to believe that life could still be kind. We started spending more time together. Not in the way two people rush into love, but in the way two people learn to trust silence again. We'd sit by the river sometimes, not talking for long stretches. And I found comfort in that. It was different from the silence I had known before, not the kind that hurt, but the kind that healed. One evening, as the sun was setting, she asked me about my past. I hesitated at first, then told her. Not everything, but enough. I told her about Emily, about the years of distance, the betrayal, the way it all ended. She didn't interrupt. She didn't judge. She just listened. Really listened. The way someone does when they care about more than just the story. When I finished, she looked at me quietly and said, "That must have been hard." "It was," I said, "but I think I needed it. To understand what love isn't, so I could recognize what it is." She nodded slowly. "And do you know what it is now?" I thought about it, then said, "Maybe it's not about forever. Maybe it's about being honest, even when it hurts." She smiled, and in that moment, I felt something shift again. Not a spark, not a rush, but a quiet warmth spreading through the spaces I thought were gone forever. Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. Claire and I grew closer, not because we were trying, but because being near her felt natural. She didn't fill the silence. She shared it. Sometimes, I catch myself watching her, the way she laughed softly, the way she brushed her hair behind her ear, and I'd feel a pang of something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. But with hope came fear. I remember one evening, as we walked through the park, she reached for my hand. For a second, I froze. Her fingers were warm, gentle, but my heart raced. It wasn't that I didn't want to hold her hand. It was that part of me was still afraid to. Afraid that letting someone in again meant risking everything all over. She must have noticed, because she said softly, "It's okay. We don't have to rush." That's when I realized she understood me. Not just the version I showed the world, but the one that still flinched at the thought of being hurt again. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window again, watching the moonlight spill across the floor. The house was still the same. Quiet, simple, but it didn't feel as heavy anymore. It's strange how one person's presence can shift the air around you. How they can walk into your life quietly and, without even trying, make the space feel lighter. I thought about Emily again. Not with pain, not even with regret. Just understanding. She had left me, yes. But her leaving had led me here, to this peace, to this clarity, to this moment of quiet acceptance. Sometimes, I think people come into our lives to teach us something. Some teach us love, others teach us loss, and a rare few teach us both. And in doing so, they set us free. The next morning, I met Claire for coffee. She smiled when she saw me, her eyes bright. For the first time in years, I smiled back, not because I was pretending to be okay, but because I truly was. And in that small, ordinary moment, over 2 cups of coffee and soft morning light, I realized something I'd been waiting to feel for a long time. The silence had finally changed. It wasn't something I had to escape anymore. It was something I could share. There's a certain peace that comes when you stop waiting for the past to make sense. I didn't notice when it happened exactly. Maybe somewhere between the long walks, the quiet dinners, and the laughter I hadn't realized I missed, but I had finally started living again. Claire was different from anyone I had ever known. She never tried to fix me. She didn't ask me to forget. She just showed up, fully, simply, consistently, like the sunrise. Every Sunday, we'd meet at a small cafe by the river. We'd sit outside, even when the wind was a bit too cold or the sun too bright. She liked to watch the water move, the way light rippled across it. "It reminds me that time never really stops," she'd say. "It just changes shape." And somehow, that made sense. One afternoon, as we sat there sipping our coffee, she asked, "Do you ever think about seeing her again?" I paused. "Emily." She nodded gently. I stared at the river for a while before answering. "Sometimes, but not the way I used to. I used to imagine her coming back, apologizing, saying she made a mistake. Now, I just hope she's okay." Claire smiled faintly. "That's kind of beautiful. Forgiveness is easier than resentment," I said quietly. "It doesn't mean forgetting. It just means I don't want to carry the weight anymore." She reached across the table, her hand brushing mine. "You've carried enough." Months went by quietly. Life settled into something resembling peace. We didn't talk about the future much. We just lived in the small moments. A shared meal, a walk under the streetlights, the comfort of being beside someone who didn't need explanations. But peace has its own kind of silence, the kind that can be shattered in a single second. It happened one evening, late in the fall. The air outside had turned cold, and I was at home making dinner when my phone buzzed. The name on the screen stopped me cold. Emily. For a second, I thought it had to be a mistake. But it wasn't. It was her. After all these years, I just stood there, staring at the screen as it rang. Part of me wanted to answer. Another part of me, the one that still remembered the nights alone, the betrayal, the silence, wanted to let it ring out. But I couldn't. I pressed accept. Hello. My voice came out quieter than I expected. There was a pause. Then I heard her voice, soft, trembling, older somehow. Daniel, it's me. I know, I said. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence between us was heavy, not angry, not cold, just full of everything that had been left unsaid. Finally, she whispered. I didn't know who else to call. I sat down slowly, the phone pressed to my ear. What's wrong? Her voice broke a little. It's Mark, he's gone. For a second, I didn't understand. Gone. He passed away. Heart attack. It happened last week. I closed my eyes. The room suddenly felt smaller. I didn't know what to say. She continued, her words shaky. I didn't call anyone. I didn't know how to. But tonight, I thought of you. I took a breath, steadying myself. Emily, I'm sorry. I really am. I know, she said quietly. You were always kind, even when I didn't deserve it. Her voice cracked. I could hear the tears in it. I made so many mistakes, Daniel. I thought I'd found something real with him, but I lost everything. And now, I just wanted to hear your voice. I sat there in silence, listening. There was so much I could have said, so many things I had once rehearsed in my mind. But in that moment, none of them mattered. The anger, the betrayal, the heartbreak, they all felt so distant now. What I felt instead was something simpler. Pity, maybe. Compassion. I forgive you, I said softly. She started to cry harder. You shouldn't. I don't deserve it. Maybe not, I said. But forgiveness isn't about who deserves it. It's about who needs it to move on. There was a long pause. I could hear her trying to catch her breath. Thank you, she finally whispered. We didn't talk for long after that. Just a few quiet words. Then she said goodbye, and the line went dead. When I set the phone down, I realized my hands were trembling. I hadn't expected her voice to still sound so familiar. I hadn't expected it to hurt, not in the old way, but in a softer, more human way. I went to the window. The city lights were blinking in the distance, and the night was still. It hit me then. All this time, I had been waiting for some kind of closure, some final moment that would make everything make sense. But closure doesn't come from others. It comes from within, when you finally stop needing their apology to find your peace. The next morning, Claire noticed something different about me. You're quiet today, she said gently as we walked by the river. I nodded. Emily called last night. Her eyes widened slightly, but she didn't say anything. She waited. She lost him, I said. She sounded broken. Claire looked down at the water, her expression unreadable. How do you feel? I don't know, I admitted. Sad, I guess. But not for me, for her. She made her choices. I made mine. I think we both paid for them. She nodded slowly. And now, I think it's over. Really over. Claire reached for my hand. I didn't flinch this time. Her fingers intertwined with mine, steady and sure. That's good, she whispered. Let it end where it should. That night, I sat alone for a while, thinking about the journey from the day she left to this very moment. It had taken years, years of silence, of pain, of learning how to be alone without being lonely. And somehow, after everything, I felt grateful. Grateful that I had survived. Grateful that I had loved, even if it ended badly. Grateful that I had found peace, not in someone else, but in myself first. Emily's chapter in my life had ended, but she had left me with something unexpected, the understanding that love isn't always meant to last. Sometimes, it's just meant to teach. Later that night, I got a text from Claire. It said, I don't know what tomorrow holds, but I'm glad you're here today. I stared at it for a long time before replying. Me too. For the first time in a long time, I'm not looking back. And I meant it. The silence that once haunted me now felt like home. Not empty, not lonely, just quiet. And in that quiet, I finally found myself again. A week after Emily's call, I received another message. It was short, just a few words. There's a service for him next Friday. You don't have to come, but I thought you should know. For a long time, I stared at the screen, unsure how to feel. Part of me wanted to ignore it. Another part, the quieter one, whispered that maybe I needed to go. Not for her, not for him, but for the man I used to be. That Friday morning, I drove out to the small chapel on the edge of town. The same one where I'd once stood years ago, The day I married her. Funny how time circles back, bringing you face to face with the ghosts you thought you'd left behind. When I walked in, a few heads turned. Most people didn't recognize me, and that was fine. Emily was at the front, dressed in black, her hair streaked with gray now. When our eyes met, she froze for a second, then gave a small, fragile nod. I nodded back. No words were exchanged. None were needed. The service was quiet. Simple. A few people spoke. Old friends, co-workers. They talked about Mark's generosity, his humor, his charm. And I sat there, listening, remembering the man I once called my best friend. There was a time when we had laughed together, dreamed together, built pieces of our lives side by side. And despite everything that happened, I couldn't bring myself to hate him anymore. Hate takes too much from you. It steals years you never get back. When the service ended, people began to leave in small groups. I waited until most were gone before I approached her. She looked tired, not just physically, but in her soul. When she saw me walking toward her, tears welled up in her eyes. "Daniel," she said softly. "Emily." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence between us was heavy, but not cold this time. "I didn't think you'd come," she said. "I almost didn't." "Why did you?" I paused, then said quietly, "Because once he was my friend, and once you were my home." Her eyes glistened. "I'm sorry for everything." I nodded. "I know." There was nothing else to say. We stood there in the soft light filtering through the stained glass, and for the first time in years, I felt no bitterness, no anger, just peace. When I walked out of the chapel, the air felt crisp, cool. The world outside was quiet, leaves scattered on the ground, the faint sound of birds in the distance. I took a long breath, closed my eyes, and let the wind brush against my face. It was over. All of it. The questions, the sleepless nights, the need for closure. I didn't need an apology anymore. I didn't need answers. I had already found what I was looking for, peace within myself. That evening, I met Claire at the cafe. She was sitting by the window, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea. When she saw me, she smiled, soft, patient, understanding. "How did it go?" she asked. "It's done," I said simply. She studied my face for a moment. "And how do you feel?" "Free," I said. "Not happy exactly, just light. Like I finally put something down I'd been carrying too long." She reached across the table, her fingers touching mine. "You look different. Calmer." I smiled. Maybe because I finally stopped fighting the past. Later that night, as we walked along the river, she said, "You ever think about what you'd say if you could talk to the man you were back then?" I thought for a while before answering. I think I'd tell him to stop holding on to what broke him, to forgive sooner, to love softer, to understand that sometimes losing people isn't punishment, it's protection. She squeezed my hand gently. "That's beautiful." I looked out at the water, shimmering in the streetlights. Maybe it just took me too long to understand it. "No," she said softly. "You learned when you were ready." We walked in silence after that, listening to the sound of the water, and I realized something. This silence wasn't empty anymore. It wasn't filled with regret or loneliness. It was filled with peace, with gratitude, with a quiet acceptance that life, in its own imperfect way, had come full circle. Sometimes, healing doesn't look like joy. It looks like stillness. It sounds like laughter returning to a home that was once too quiet. It feels like sitting beside someone who sees you, not who you were, but who you've become. When I got home that night, I looked around my house, the same one that had once felt so hollow. Now, it felt different, warmer, lived in. There were traces of life again. A scarf Claire had left on the chair, a book on the coffee table, 2 mugs by the sink. For the first time, I didn't feel alone. I turned off the lights and stood by the window, watching the city lights shimmer in the distance. And I whispered to myself, almost like a prayer, "Thank you. For the pain. For the silence. For the lesson." Because without them, I wouldn't have found the peace I was standing in now. I don't think I'll ever forget Emily. You don't forget someone who shaped your life that deeply, even if the memory is bittersweet. But she belongs to another time now. And I belong to this one, a quieter, wiser, gentler version of myself. Some stories don't end with grand gestures or second chances. Sometimes, they end with forgiveness, the kind that doesn't need to be spoken out loud. And that's enough. That night, before I went to bed, I got a message from Claire. Just one sentence. "You deserve peace." I smiled. Maybe for the first time in years, I truly believed that. It had been nearly 5 years since Emily had last appeared in my life. Not in person, not in a phone call, not even in the echoes of old letters I had kept, tucked away in a drawer I rarely opened. For a long time, I didn't think about her at all, at least not the way I used to. My days were filled with the quiet rhythm of work, walks, and weekends with Claire. Life had a steady pulse now. Peace wasn't loud, and it certainly wasn't dramatic. But it was mine, and I cherished it. Then, one rainy evening, my phone rang. The ringtone was soft, almost muted. I glanced at the screen and froze. Emily. I stared at her name for what felt like a long time. My first thought was disbelief. My second was caution. My third, a dull, heavy curiosity. I swiped to answer. "Daniel, it's me," she said. Her voice was thin, trembling, almost breaking. I didn't respond right away. I just listened, as if hearing her voice again was a test, a fragile bridge across years of silence. I don't know who else to call," she whispered. "I'm so sorry. I don't know where to start." The words fell like rain through the phone. And though I had spent years learning how to keep my distance from her, something in her voice, the fragility, the pain, stirred a memory I hadn't thought about in years. I took a deep breath. "Emily," I said slowly, "it's been a long time. What happened?" There was a pause. A long one. "I lost everything," she said finally. "Mark is gone. My life, it's falling apart. I don't know what to do, and I needed someone to hear me. You were always there, even when I didn't deserve it." I felt the weight of her words settle inside me. I could hear her trembling, hear the quiet sobs restrained by a half-broken voice. "Emily," I said gently, "slow down. Tell me what's going on." She explained, in broken pieces, between quiet sobs and shaky breaths. Mark had left her years ago, not dead, not gone, but gone from her life in a way that left her utterly alone. Her business had failed, friends had drifted away, and she had been left to face everything on her own. And now, finally, she had reached out. I sat down in the living room, the rain tapping against the windows. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to hang up, to protect the quiet, peaceful life I had built. Another part, the part that had once loved her, the part that had once cared too deeply, felt something soft stir in my chest. A sense of pity, yes. A sense of compassion. Not longing, not desire, but a quiet human recognition that she was suffering. "Emily," I said after a long pause, "I can listen, but I need you to understand, I'm not the person I used to be. I've built my life now. I'm at peace." "I know," she whispered. I can't carry this alone anymore." We spoke for hours that night. She told me about the years I hadn't been there, the mistakes, the regrets, the people she had lost, the loneliness that had swallowed her. I didn't interrupt. I didn't judge. I just listened. Her voice trembled so much it was almost impossible to focus. Every once in a while, she would pause, take a shaky breath, and whisper, "I'm so sorry, Daniel. I never meant for any of this to happen." And every time, I felt the old quiet ache, not the kind that blindsides you, not the sharp kind, but the deep, slow ache of understanding someone's human fragility. "Emily," I said softly, "I've spent years making peace with the past, and I forgive you, but I can't undo the life you lost, and I can't put back what's gone." She didn't say anything for a long moment, just a quiet, broken sob through the line. When the call ended that night, I sat in the living room for a long while, staring at the ceiling. My hands were still trembling slightly. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel desire. I felt calm, a strange, profound calm. I realized that forgiveness, the kind that doesn't need to be spoken aloud, is the kind that frees you the most. And while I could not, and would not, let her return to my life, I could allow her to exist in peace, even if only in memory. The next morning, I woke early, as usual. Claire was asleep beside me, her breathing even and calm. I felt a deep gratitude for her presence. She had been my anchor through years of silence and rebuilding. And now, after this call, I understood more clearly than ever that life is about holding on to the people who stay, not the ones who leave. I made coffee, sat by the balcony, and watched the city wake. The rain had stopped. The world was quiet. The air smelled clean, soft, and alive. And I thought about Emily. I thought about everything she had been, everything I had lost, and everything I had gained. I whispered to myself, quietly, almost as if letting it float into the empty morning. I hope you find your way, Emily. And I hope I never forget how much silence can teach us. The days after that phone call were strange. I went through my routine as usual, mornings with coffee, walks along the river, quiet evenings at home with Claire. But the memory of her voice lingered, not in a painful way, but in a hollow sort of echo, a reminder of something unfinished. I didn't tell Claire about the call right away. I wasn't hiding it. I just wanted to process it myself. Some things, you realize, aren't meant to disrupt the calm you've built. I thought about Emily constantly, not in the way of longing or regret, but in the way you notice a shadow that moves with the sun, a presence that once defined your life, now distant but still there. She had reached out broken, needing someone to hear her, and I had been that someone. But hearing her voice again made me realize how much I had changed. The man who once spent nights wondering why she left was gone. The man who had flinched at the memory of betrayal had been replaced by someone quieter, calmer, and wiser. I could listen. I could empathize. But I would not be drawn back into the past. It took a few days before she called again. Daniel, her voice cracked over the line. I don't know what to do. I feel like I'm disappearing. I could hear her holding back tears, trembling as she spoke. And I understood. There was a time I might have tried to fix her. There was a time I might have believed she could come back into my life and make everything right. But now I understood the difference between love and responsibility. I could care without stepping back into chaos. Emily, I said softly, you're in pain. I hear you, and I'm glad you reached out. But I need you to understand something. I'm not the man I used to be. I can't go back. I can't fix what's gone. She was silent for a long moment. Then she whispered, I know. I needed to hear you. That's when I realized, sometimes people don't call for solutions. Sometimes they just need witnesses. Sometimes they need someone who will let them exist in their pain without judgment. I hear you, I said again, and I forgive you. But this isn't about coming back together. It's about closure. For both of us. After that call, I felt a sense of calm wash over me. I realized that part of forgiveness is letting go, not just of anger, but of expectations. Not just of resentment, but of desire. Not just of the past, but of the need to control what comes after. I started to think about Claire, sitting across from me in the quiet mornings, her presence steady and real. She didn't demand the past. She didn't need my explanations. She just was there, a living testament to the fact that peace doesn't arrive in grand gestures. It arrives slowly, quietly, in the people who stay. Weeks went by. Emily's calls became fewer. I never pushed her to speak, never told her what to do. I simply listened when she reached out, offering what I could without letting her unravel the life I had rebuilt. And in that space, in the quiet balance between compassion and self-preservation, I began to understand something fundamental. Life is not about revenge. It's not about reclaiming what was lost. It's about learning to carry your past without letting it define you. I could feel it in the rhythm of my days, in the warmth of Claire's hand in mine, in the calm of mornings spent watching sunlight spill across the balcony floor. Then, one evening, Emily called again. Her voice was soft, but steadier this time. I just wanted to say thank you, she said. For what? I asked. For listening. For not hating me. For letting me speak and letting it end. I smiled quietly. That's what we do for the people who hurt us. Sometimes, the hardest thing we can do is let them go, even with love. There was silence on the line. Then she whispered, I'm trying. I know, I said. And that's enough. After hanging up, I sat in my living room for a long time. I thought about the years of pain, the nights of loneliness, the silence that had once suffocated me. And I realized that the silence had changed again. It wasn't heavy or bitter. It wasn't a punishment. It was a space I had earned. A space that allowed me to hear compassion without giving up my life. I stood by the window and watched the city lights blink softly in the night. And I whispered to myself, some people return to your life not to stay, but to teach you how to carry your peace. A few weeks after our last call, Emily asked to meet. I hesitated at first. Part of me wanted to say no, to protect the life I had painstakingly built, the peace that now felt so fragile and precious. But another part, the part that had learned that silence doesn't always heal without acknowledgement, agreed. We arranged to meet at a small park, one that wasn't far from my home. It was quiet, tucked between two streets, with benches under trees and a narrow path that followed a little stream. The day was cool, the sunlight soft and golden. Everything about the park seemed to whisper calm. When I arrived, I saw her sitting on a bench near the stream. Emily looked older, softer, worn in the way that comes from years of mistakes, loss, and survival. She didn't stand immediately. She just watched me approach. "Hi," I said quietly. "Hi," she whispered back. We sat in silence for a long moment. Not awkward, not tense, just a quiet acknowledgement of everything that had happened. Finally, she spoke. "Hi. I don't expect anything from you," she said. "I just wanted to see you. One last time." I nodded. "I understand." Her hands rested on her lap, trembling slightly. "I've spent years trying to fix myself, trying to figure out why I made the choices I did. And I realized something. I can't change the past. I can't undo the pain I caused. But I wanted to at least say I'm sorry." I looked at her. Her eyes glistened with tears, not demanding forgiveness, just expressing the weight she had carried alone for years. "I forgive you," I said softly. "I've carried enough anger for both of us. And it's time to let it go." Her lips trembled, and she nodded once. "Thank you. That means more than you know." We didn't speak for long after that. We walked slowly along the path, listening to the water ripple past the banks. I noticed how frail she looked, how human, not the woman I had loved once, not the woman who had left me broken, but someone real, living with the consequences of her choices. There was a moment when she paused and looked at me. "I never meant to hurt you," she said, barely audible. "I know," I replied. "And it's done. The past is done. You don't owe me anything." Her lips curved into the faintest smile. "Goodbye, Daniel," she said, her voice steady now. I nodded. "Goodbye, Emily." As I watched her walk away down the path, the sunlight catching her hair, I felt a strange emptiness, but not in the old, painful sense. It was a quiet emptiness, like a breath released after holding it for too long. I realized something. Closure isn't always dramatic. It doesn't always come with speeches, tears, or resolutions. Sometimes, closure is just letting someone leave while you remain. And sometimes, it's sitting still while the past walks away, knowing it can't touch you anymore. I returned home to Claire that afternoon. She was in the kitchen, stirring tea, the warm scent of chamomile filling the room. I watched her for a moment, just looking, and felt a deep gratitude for her presence. "I saw her today," I said quietly. Claire turned, waiting for me to say more. "She's gone," I continued. "One last time. And it's over. Really over." Claire smiled softly, moving closer to me. She didn't ask questions. She didn't need to. She just put her hand on mine, steady and warm. "That's good," she said. "You've earned your peace." And in that moment, I understood fully. The past could remain where it belonged. The future, quiet, steady, and shared with someone who stayed, was mine to live. That evening, I sat by the balcony, listening to the soft hum of the city below. I thought about Emily, about the years she had carried regret, about the lessons of forgiveness, patience, and acceptance. And I thought about myself, about the man who had once been shattered by loss, who had learned to rebuild quietly, and who now could breathe freely in his own life. Sometimes, I whispered to myself, we think closure comes from confrontation, but real closure comes from understanding, compassion, and the courage to let the past remain in the past. I looked at the lights reflecting on the river and smiled softly. The silence around me was no longer heavy. It was gentle, steady, and full of life. And for the first time in a long time, I felt completely free. The days after seeing Emily for the last time were quiet, in the way that follows a storm, when the air feels fresher, the sky clearer, and even the smallest sounds seem sharper, more alive. I didn't talk much about it with Claire. I didn't need to. She already understood. She had always understood. Sometimes, the most important conversations are the ones that don't happen. The ones where silence speaks louder than words. I found myself thinking about what I had learned over the years, about loss, forgiveness, and the fragile, fleeting nature of human connections. Emily had returned, broken and crying, years after she had left my life. And she reminded me of something I had known but forgotten. Life doesn't wait for you to be ready. Pain doesn't give warnings. And people sometimes return, not to repair what's been broken, but to show you how far you've come. I had once carried bitterness, anger, and heartbreak like heavy stones in my chest. But by the time Emily called me, I had already learned to set them down. I had learned that forgiveness doesn't erase pain. It just makes it lighter to carry. Claire and I continued our quiet life together. We walked by the river in the mornings, brewed tea in the afternoons, and shared meals without hurry or fuss. Our laughter returned slowly, softly, filling the spaces that had once felt hollow. There were moments when I thought about the man I had been, the one desperate for apologies, haunted by betrayal, unable to find peace. And I realized how far I had come. It wasn't about forgetting Emily. It wasn't about pretending the past didn't hurt. It was about understanding that life is bigger than one person, one mistake, one heartbreak. It's about the capacity to continue, to love again, to find stillness after chaos. One evening, as Claire and I sat on the balcony watching the sunset, I reached for her hand. "Thank you," I whispered. "For what?" she asked, her eyes curious but gentle. "For being here. For staying. For showing me what peace really feels like." She smiled softly, squeezing my hand. "You earned it," she said. And in that moment, I understood fully. Peace is not something you find. It is something you create, quietly, patiently, with the people who choose to stay beside you. I thought again of Emily, of the tears, the regrets, and the apologies. I realized that her story with me had ended years ago, and mine had begun again, slowly, quietly, with someone who chose to remain in my life. Sometimes, people leave for reasons you cannot control. Sometimes, they return, broken and seeking comfort. And sometimes, the greatest act of love you can offer is listening once, forgiving, and letting them walk away. Life moved forward as it always does. I returned to work, to walks, to evenings filled with quiet conversation and small, meaningful routines. I wrote again, sometimes alone, sometimes with Claire nearby, sharing thoughts and reflections. I had learned that happiness doesn't arrive in grand moments. It arrives in quiet mornings, in gentle smiles, in hands held without expectation. And for the first time, I understood the depth of that quiet truth. We cannot rewrite the past. We cannot undo mistakes. We cannot summon back the people who left. But we can choose peace. We can choose presence. We can choose to live fully, here and now. Years later, when I sometimes thought about Emily, it was with a calm heart. I no longer felt bitterness, longing, or regret. I felt understanding, compassion, acceptance, and I carried her memory not as a wound, but as a reminder of how fragile, beautiful, and fleeting life can be. A reminder that love, even when it hurts, can teach you how to heal. Claire and I sat together that night, the city lights flickering below, the world quiet and alive. "I'm glad we found each other," I said softly. She leaned her head against my shoulder. "Me too," she whispered. And in that silence, the kind that doesn't demand words, that doesn't need explanations, I realized that the story of my life was not about those who left. It was about those who stayed. It was about forgiveness, compassion, and the quiet courage to live fully in the present. Sometimes, the people who break you also teach you how to stand again. Sometimes, the ones who return, crying and broken, remind you how far you've come. And sometimes, peace isn't something you find in others. It's something you carry inside yourself, quietly, patiently, and with an open heart. The following morning, I woke to quiet sunlight spilling through the curtains. Claire was still asleep beside me, breathing softly. I lay there for a while, just listening, letting the calm wash over me. I thought about everything. The years of heartbreak, the silence, the loss, the long nights spent alone wondering if I would ever feel whole again. And I realized how far I had come. Pain had once been my companion. Now, it was a teacher. Regret had once weighed me down. Now, it was a guide. I had learned that life doesn't always give you the endings you want. Sometimes it gives you endings you need. And sometimes it gives you beginnings you never expected. I thought about Emily one last time. She had returned, broken and crying, seeking solace, seeking forgiveness. And I had given it, not for her sake, but for mine. Because holding on to resentment only traps you in the past. Forgiveness, even when it's quiet and unspoken, sets you free. I realized that the greatest gift you can offer someone who hurt you isn't anger or revenge. It's compassion. It's understanding. It's the ability to wish them well without allowing their choices to control your life. I got out of bed and poured myself a cup of coffee. The aroma filled the small kitchen, warm and familiar. I walked to the balcony and looked at the city stretching out below, streets humming with life, lights reflecting on the river, people moving through their own stories. I thought about the man I had been, lonely, bitter, hurt, and I smiled softly because that man no longer existed. I had rebuilt myself. I had found love again with someone who stayed. I had found peace. Later that afternoon, Claire and I went for our walk by the river. The leaves had turned golden, drifting slowly to the ground, carried by the wind. She slipped her hand into mine, and I felt the steady warmth of her presence. No words were needed. We didn't need to speak about the past or the calls or the heartbreak. The silence was enough. It was calm, gentle, and full of life. And in that silence, I finally understood something I had been learning for years. Life is not about the people who leave. Life is about the people who stay. It's about the quiet moments of presence, the steady hands, the gentle words, the shared routines. It's about love that doesn't demand, peace that doesn't require perfection, and forgiveness that frees you more than anyone else. That night, as I sat on the balcony again, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. I had loved, lost, and learned. I had been abandoned, betrayed, and broken. I had forgiven, rebuilt, and found peace. And I realized this. We cannot rewrite the past. We cannot undo the pain we have caused or suffered. But we can choose how we live after it. We can carry our wounds with dignity, our memories with clarity, and our hearts with openness. I looked at Claire, sleeping peacefully beside me, and whispered softly, "Thank you for staying. Thank you for being here." And in that moment, I understood fully that life is not about revenge, regret, or even reunion. Life is about presence. Life is about forgiveness. Life is about love, quiet, steady, and enduring. We cannot control who leaves our lives. We cannot summon closure. We cannot reclaim what is gone. But we can embrace what remains. We can honor the lessons of the past. And we can walk forward, quietly, patiently, and with open hearts. The city outside was alive, the night soft and still. The silence around me was no longer heavy. It was full of life, full of gratitude, full of hope. And for the first time in decades, I felt completely, deeply, undeniably free.